Hey guys, in this lesson, I've got 3 goals that I want to achieve before the lesson ends, and they're all to do with creating a better user experience and also creating a better user interface. Let me show you what we're going to achieve. On the left is the current version of our app where everything goes in looking exactly the same because we're using the same reusable cell. And it looks like as if I'm just being ghosted because I'm just sending lots of messages as myself, never getting a reply. But on the right here in the final version of the app, I should be able to see a difference between the messages that I've sent, which are marked as me, and the messages that my recipient has sent, which is marked as you. So now I'm logged in as a different user, and if I was to write and hit send, you can see that this comes out completely different from this one. The second thing I want to show you how to do is to be able to scroll to the very bottom of the table view. So that way, if we had a whole bunch of messages, let's just go ahead and add a few more. Not sure why Sheffield came up right now, but let's just go ahead and add some more messages. And you can see already the messages are no longer showing up in the current window of my table view. And if I scroll down, I'll be able to see them. But every time I send a new message, I have to scroll down some more. So this is not a great user experience if I have to scroll down every time to see my latest message. And it also means that when I log into my app, if there's more messages than there are in the table view, it shouldn't really show the top one, right? It should show the one right at the bottom, which is what happened most recently. So that's the second thing that we're going to be tackling here. This way of automatically scrolling to the very bottom of the table view. And the last thing I want to show you how to do is to customize the navigation bar so that we have a different background color, a different font size for our title, a different color for the logout button and the title text, as well as removing the navigation bar from the welcome screen because it looks a bit unnecessary here, right? Those are the 3 things that we're going to be tackling. So let's get on with the first one. How can we differentiate our sender from our recipient? Effectively, what we're going to do is in our chat view controller, at the place where we load up our cells for the table view, we're going to check to see if the sender of the message that's going into the cell is the same as the user that's currently logged in. And if so, then that means this current message that's being loaded up, this current cell, belongs to the current user, in which case it will show this particular style of cell. But if the user of the message is not the same as the current user, then we're going to show this style of message. So how can we achieve this? Well, one way would be to have 2 different message cells, but we can also work with a single message cell and just style it differently depending on the sender. And that's the way we're going to do it. Let's go into our messagecell.zip file and make some small modifications. I'm going to go ahead and copy this right image view and go ahead and paste it inside here. Now, as soon as I hit paste or Command V, it usually pastes it right next to the previous one. But what I want to do is I want to actually drag it so that it comes to the very front of our horizontal stack. So you should see a line right at the beginning, which means that it's being put at the very left part of the stack view. And in terms of the hierarchy in the document outline, this is what you should see: the me avatar, the message bubble, and the right image view. So this left one shouldn't have the me image. Instead, if we click on the image property, we're going to change it to the you avatar, which is another image that we included in the assets.exe assets right here. So now that we've got 2 different types of bubbles, what we want to be able to do is to hide one of these if the message came from myself or if the message came from my recipient. Let's go ahead and link up that image view by opening up our assistant, and we've already got our right image view, so let's go ahead and just call this one the left image view. and hit connect. So now we've got both of these image views linked up to our message cell class. We'll be able to manipulate the message cell inside our chat view controller. So now let's head into our chat view controller, and inside our table view cell for row at index path method, let's go ahead and modify our cell depending on whether if the current message that is being displayed into the cell is from the current logged in user or from somebody else. And to do that, let's go ahead and create a new constant called message. And we're going to set that to the current message at index path row from the messages array. So this first part before the dot body. Just as a quick reminder, this method, table view cell for row at, gets called as many times as there are cells. So in our case, we're saying create the number of cells that match the number of messages, and for each of those cells, call this method to figure out what needs to be displayed in it. In our case, we're going to be using a message object to populate the cell. So we can now change the cell label.text to message.body. And if we want to get hold of the sender property of the message, then we can just tap into message.sender. And we can use an if statement to check if this is equal to, so 2 equals, the current logged in user. So we'll use the auth module auth.auth.current-user.email. So remember, this is the same thing that we used when we created each of the messages. So when we said let message.sender equals the current user's email, and then put that message sender into the sender field of our new document, which gets saved in our messages collection. And that messages collection is what we're retrieving and putting into the messages array. And then for each of the rows in our table, we're getting hold of the message and we're checking to see if its sender is the same as the current logged in user. So that means that all of these messages that match this criteria are the ones that the current logged in user sent. So that means that the cell that they should see is the me avatar and this particular message. And then we have to hide this you avatar, so the one on the left, the one that's linked to the left image view. Let's go back to our chat view controller, and inside this if statement, so this means this is a message from the current user. And in this case, we're still going to be creating a message cell from the message cell class and the message cell zib, but we're going to modify it slightly differently. So let's go ahead and move these 2 lines of code to above where we actually make the adjustments. So right here. So now that we've added the message into the cell, we're ready to go ahead and customize it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say cell.leftImageView dot is hidden is set to true, and we're going to make sure that the right image view is not hidden. So let's change that property to false. So now we're displaying the right image view, but we're hiding the left image view. And we're also going to set the cell's background color to make it look a little bit different from the messages that we're getting from other senders. So we're going to say cell.message bubble, which is that UI view, that is this purple one right here. We're going to set it to have a different background color, which is going to be equal to a UI color that is named based on one of our constants. So remember that in order to use our custom colors that we create in our assets.exe assets, like this brand light purple, we have to use that method UI color named. And instead of using the brand light purple string in here, I'm going to use the same one that I've already got in my constants right here. So it's going to be under the structure K. Inside K, we've got a structure called brand colors, and then inside that, we've got a property called light purple. So let's go back here and tap into the K constant, and then we're going to go to brand colors, and then we're going to go for light purple, like that. So that way we won't make any typos here, and we'll be able to get the light purple set as the background color. Now, in addition to setting the cell's background color, we're going to also change the label's text color. So let's go ahead and change that property, and you guessed it, we're going to use the same method, UI color named, and in this case though, it's going to be the purple color that we're going to use as the text color. So k.brandcolors.purple. So that way we have a light purple background with a purple text. And in the case where this is a message from another sender, well, in that case, so the else statement is going to have the cell's left image view dot is hidden set as false, and the cell's right image view dot is hidden set as true. And then we're going to basically switch up these two things so that instead of having a background color of light purple, it's going to have a background color of purple, and the text is going to be light purple instead. Let's go ahead and run our app and see what this actually gives us. Now, when we log in and we take a look at our table view, you can see that for all the messages that I've sent from the same username, so as myself, they have the same appearance. But if I go ahead and log out and log in with the other account that I've signed up for, so if you haven't got one, then go ahead and register a new account. So this is a@b.com. We're now getting all the cells formatted as if the message came from somebody else. So let's say I go ahead and write a new message. I am a@b.com and hit send. Notice how we now have completely different formats for this type of message versus the message that's sent from this user, 1@2.com. So now let's hit send and scroll to the bottom. You can see that we've now formatted our cells to be able to differentiate between the messages that the user sent and the ones that they received. Now, this is a good point to mention that if you had formatted your cells to be rounded for the previous dimension, so previously in our message cell.zib, we only had this message bubble and the right image view. But now, in addition to that, we've also got the left image view. So given that our stack view has 20 points of space set between all the elements, we've now changed the dimensions of the cell. So if you're wondering why it is that your message bubbles no longer look right or the same way that you had before, well, it's because of this line of code. So if you've changed this to divide by 4 or say another number, you'll have to change it to divide by 5 if you want this perfectly rounded corner like I've got here. If you wanted to have it square or any other different shape, then feel free to keep it the way that you've got it. This is just a quick tip in case you're wondering why it is the shape has changed. So let's tackle the next problem. Notice how every time I send a new message, it gets put right at the bottom and we have to scroll manually to be able to see it, which is quite painful. So let's try and change that. In our chat view controller, the point where we can do this is inside our load messages method, because it's here where we have our snapshot listener added to our collection, and every time there's a change in our database, we trigger this closure, which empties out our messages array and adds all of the new messages back into that messages array. So at this time point is where we call reload data to trigger these two delegate methods and put the cells into our table view. Now, if we wanted to scroll to the very bottom of the table view every time there's a new message added, then all we have to do is to call a method, which is self.tableview.scroll to row. Now, this particular method expects a index path provided. So we're going to have to create that as a constant as well. So let's call it index path, and I'm going to initialize a index path object, and I'm going to choose the initializer that asks for a row number. This is basically saying scroll to row And in this line, we're creating which row we want to scroll to. We want to scroll to the very end of our messages array. So we can simply write messages dot count. But this is not enough, because let's do the maths. Let's say that we had an array with 2 items, right? Just A and B. Well, in this case, the array.count is going to be equal to 2. There's just 2 items. But if we try to get hold of the last item in the array by tapping into the item at index 2, then that's going to be 0, 1, 2. So it's going to be out of bounds. So in addition to writing messages.count here, we have to subtract 1 to be able to get hold of the last item in our messages array. And we also have to add the self keyword because we are inside a closure. The next thing it asks for is the section number, and we're going to set that as 0 because we actually only have one section. Now, if we were inside, say, the settings page of our iPhone, then you'll notice that it has lots of different sections. Here's section 0, section 1, section 2, but we've only got one, so we can set that as the first section. So now that we've created this index path object, we can now use it inside here to specify which row we want our table view to scroll to. And then the position for the table view is to position that row at the top. And then the animated property, you can either set to true, which is going to give you an animation of that scrolling to this row, or you can set it to false if you just want it to go straight there without the animation. Let me demonstrate so you can see what's the difference. Let's log in and you'll see that it scrolled, right? It just did that animation to go to the very bottom of our table view and show the latest message, which is the effect that we wanted. If I change that to false, however, you'll see that once the screen loads up, it goes straight to the bottom of the table view without that animation. So I'm going to leave this up to you. Depending on whichever way you prefer your app to be, then you can set that property however you want, true or false. But we've now solved this problem, because every time I write a new message now, if I hit send, you can see that it pops up right at the bottom, so I don't have to manually scroll to see it. But there is something that we can still improve here though, because when I create a new message and I hit send, the old message doesn't disappear from my text field. So I have to manually delete it in order to write a new message, which is a bit painful, right? And I want to pose this as a challenge to you. Can you modify the code so that when the send button is pressed, the old text is deleted? I'll give you a few seconds to pause the video before I show you the solution. Ready? Here's the solution. The key is locating the time point in our code when we send a new message. And that time point is the IB action send pressed. So all we need to do here is add a little bit of code. If the message was successfully saved, then we can go ahead and tap into our text field, our message text field, and set its text property to an empty string. This way, the text field will empty out whenever we're done with sending the message. And because we're inside a closure and we're trying to update the user interface, remember that we should tap into the dispatch queue.main.async method so that this actually happens on the main thread rather than on a background thread, which is where the code enclosures tend to take place. And that's the solution to the challenge. Now let's run our app and see this behavior showing up. Let's go ahead and write a message and hit send. And now that message goes in and our text field clears up. Perfect. Now all that's left to do is the last thing that we mentioned, which is to format our navigation bar. The first thing I said we wanted to do was to change its color and change some of the properties. Now, to change this particular nav bar, you don't actually change it in this view controller. You change it in the navigation controller. So selecting this navigation bar from the navigation controller, which controls all of these screens, then we can go into the attributes inspector and change the bar tint color. So let's go ahead and select our brand blue to go in there. And you can see that that color now goes in all the screens where it's being displayed. And we're also going to change the title color. So that will change the text that's going in to the navigation bars as the title. So at the moment, we're setting that title right here in our view did load, where we said title equals k.appname, which of course corresponds to our constant app name, which is this right here. An alternative way of setting the title is to click on this navigation item and put it right here, where it'll show up. So depending on whichever one you want to use, you can set it either in the interface builder or as code inside the chat view controller. Now let's go back to our navigation bar and change the title color to white and change the font size to system font and black, so really, really bold, so much bolder than bold, and change the size to 25 to make it a lot bigger so that it shows up. So now let's go ahead and give it a spin. And once we go to the login page, you can see that there is this clear difference between the navigation bar and this blue background screen. So if you want this to look identical, then the way to address that is by selecting the navigation bar on the navigation controller and then changing that translucent property to false. So now let me run that app again. And on our login screen, you can see that those two colors now match perfectly. Now, the final thing I want to change is to make that back button stand out a little bit more, because at the moment it's blue on blue because we've changed the color of the navigation bar. So again, selecting the navigation bar from the navigation controller, let's go ahead and change the tint color to white. That way, all of the bar buttons will turn into a white colored button item, like so. Now, all that we have left to do is the last thing, which is how can we disable this navigation bar so that it doesn't show up on some of the screens? For example, it makes sense for it to be here because we might want to press back, but on the welcome screen, it looks kind of ugly just to have it hanging around not doing anything. Let's go into that welcome view controller. And in order to disable that navigation bar, the property that we can set is called isNavigationBarHidden. But the time point where we want to hide it is at the point where the view will appear. So this is just before the view shows up on screen. And it's at this point in time where we're going to tap into the navigation controller dot is navigation bar hidden, and we're going to set it to true so that we hide it for our welcome view controller. But notice how if I run the app as it is right now, while I've hidden the navigation bar for the welcome screen, if I go into the login or the register screens, I've now lost my navigation bar. It's still hidden. So in addition to hiding it, I also have to unhide it. And the time point where I want to do that is when we're about to go on to the next screen. And we can override a method called viewWillDisappear. So just before the view disappears and the next screen shows up, we tap into our navigation controller and reset the isNavigationBarHidden property to false. This way, just before the view shows up, we set that navigation bar to hidden. But as soon as I press login and my welcome view controller disappears, my navigation bar becomes visible again. So that way we only get it on the screens where we want it, and we disable it for the screens where we don't. Now, the final thing to note is something that won't affect how it behaves, but whenever you're overriding one of these lifecycle methods from the view controller, such as view will appear, view will disappear, and view did load, you should always call the super method, like how we have here with view did load. So this is something that it's best to get into the habit of doing because it's good practice. And in fact, when you read the documentation for one of these methods, let's take a look at the one for view will appear, you can see that down here in the discussion, it tells you that if you override this method, like what we have done here, and we're providing our own custom functionality, you must call super at some point in your implementation. So that just means that the parent, the UI view controller, which our class is inheriting from, gets an opportunity to run its own code inside its own view will appear. And then afterwards, we can run our code, which has our custom functionality. So in order to do this, we write super.view will appear, and then we pass in the same value of animated as we have here from our inputs. And we do the same thing for our view will disappear. And this, even though you'll find that when you run the app, doesn't actually change anything at all, but it's really good practice to get into the habit of always calling super whenever you override any function from the super class. In the next lesson, we're going to be looking in more detail at each of these lifecycle methods that come from the UI view controller. And we're going to see when they get called and how they allow us to tap into certain time points during the life of our view controller and to be able to perform things such as updating the UI or triggering animations or starting timers, etc. So for all of that and more, I'll see you there.